Hello and welcome to the Clear Crypto Podcast. No jargon, no hype, just straight talk on what crypto and blockchain do today and what they'll do tomorrow. This is a podcast brought to you by StarkWare and Cointelegraph. Now, if the words clear and crypto sound to you like a bit of a contradiction in terms, you're in the right place. Maybe you're getting started in this world. This is a podcast where you can get up to speed. And if you're an OG, if you live and breathe this stuff already, don't go anywhere because this is a podcast for you too. And I'll tell you why. Because one of crypto's biggest challenges is how to communicate what it's all about to others without frying their brains. I guarantee with these discussions, you'll be clearer and better at doing this. I'm Nathan. I'm a journalist who's fallen into blockchain. I am so happy that you've decided to tune in to the podcast today in what is really a very special week for crypto. A special week because much of the crypto leadership has flocked to the bright lights of Las Vegas, where the annual Bitcoin Vegas conference is taking place. And this year, it's not just the run-of-the-mill event. No, this year there is a huge sense of optimism over there in Vegas about where crypto is going in general and in America. Unprecedented interest of people close to the US administration there. This year, JD Vance has been enthusing about crypto, and we've let our dear co-presenter Gareth, we let him off for a week so that he can talk to us about the themes, give us the inside track over coming episodes. Now, specifically this week, when everyone's talking about crypto in the US, everyone's talking about Vegas, I want to remind us all that crypto is absolutely a global movement. It's absolutely a global vision. And we need to remind ourselves of this and remember to explore the many different global stories taking place across the world which relate to crypto. And I want to take you now to Africa, where a huge part of crypto's future is being written right now. Okay, a lot of the crypto conversations do center around Silicon Valley, around London, maybe around Singapore, but some of the most urgent and creative crypto innovations happening in places that don't often get that spotlight, and especially in Africa, which is home to dozens of countries, each with their own financial and technological realities. Africa isn't a monolith, it's a continent of contrasts. And in many of those places, crypto is actually a lifeline. We are honored to have a guest today who has been right in the middle of that story. Kevin Imani is one of the key figures building StarkWare's Africa venture studio. He spent the last few years working with crypto builders from Rwanda, Nigeria, Kenya, and elsewhere. He brings a really deeply informed, deeply local perspective on what crypto looks like when it's built out of real need. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us on the Clear Crypto Podcast. Kevin, let's jump straight in. So many conversations about crypto and blockchain, focused on America, focused on Europe, stuck within that bubble. When we walk outside of the bubble, when we look at blockchain from standing in Africa, we see something different. What is it that we see that's different?
What's different is that young students have been using blockchain technology way before it became mainstream in regions in Kenya, in Zambia, in Nigeria. It was a necessity.
Kevin, first of all, a few quick fire questions about yourself. Where are you from?
I'm originally from Rwanda and spent some time in Kenya, and now I'm based in South Africa.
And you've just joined StarkWare. Tell us what you're going to be doing for StarkWare.
Yeah, very excited. Basically, I'm part of the Africa Venture Studio. So we're going to be expanding what StarkWare is doing to the continent. Essentially, we're going to be investing into Africa as StarkWare and looking at very exciting products and teams that are looking to leverage scaling and everything that StarkWare does.
And I guess before we get into the whole blockchain crypto element, what should we know about how it all looks different standing from Africa?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big continent, 53 plus countries. We have various cultures, various different population, and I think also needs that you'll find in East, West, North, Southern Africa. So in order for us to sort of move towards, I guess, probably a more sort of digital, inclusive, pioneering sort of world, I think there's a lot of internal infrastructural frictions that we need to think about, that we need to solve, and using and leveraging really the technology to solve our deepest needs. That's really what excites me the most.
Okay, and I must ask you, as an Englishman, I hear a twang of English accent in there. Did you by any chance study in England?
Yeah, I did. I studied in Oxford. I studied political science, focusing on African nation states, Southern African nation states.
Great. So a little tease for listeners of what might be coming up. I want to talk to you about cross-border payments and how they're relevant, about how in a country where you don't have a national grid, you actually have energy being created that gets wasted, and how blockchain can do something really interesting with that energy. And I also want to talk to you about the challenge of internet in places where people don't necessarily have access to internet, how blockchain can actually change that on a day-to-day basis. So hopefully we'll get to all of that. But before we do, Kevin, tell me some scenarios when banking would be banned or difficult or complex and it's overcoming that.
Yeah, so I mean, for example, let's say Kenya, right? Usually what people use for banking is M-Pesa. M-Pesa is basically a very simple way to send money with a phone number to someone else. So it's centralized, it's not blockchain-based, it's been there since 2008. And that has changed really how people would experience banking without having to have a bank account and everything that goes with it. And that is really what I would say probably over 90% of people use. They're familiar with that. That's what they use, right? Mm-hmm. But that's shillings, that's Kenyan shillings. That's not dollars, that's not, euros. You can't off-ramp or on-ramp.
So very limited functionality.
Yeah, very limited functionalities. Say, for example, you do a remote job or you're a developer or you're a creative designer for a client abroad, they'll pay you in something else. They'll pay you in dollars, they'll pay you in euros. Sometimes even in digital currencies. And now you have to figure out, okay, what do I do? What do I do with that? Mm-hmm. And you have to hope that you have rails and infrastructure that allows you to off-ramp that into Kenyan shillings. And you have cases where that is very difficult. That is very complex because now you have to figure out which platforms you have to download or which exchange platform you have to start adopt. You have to start becoming a trader almost, right? So these are just very difficult ways that people in Kenya have had experienced.
So have you come across scenarios where people have actually earned dollars and those dollars have kind of been stuck? They've been unable to make use of those dollars?
Oh yeah. That's a famous example, actually. That was in Nigeria, where PayPal was canceled. And you now are stuck, right? Because now, you find loopholes and you find ways because you really need the money, but it just makes it almost impossible for you to now get your Nairas, because then again, you need your Nairas to go and spend locally or send money to the community, whatnot.
So let's just join the dots here, because for me, this is really fascinating, because in some previous episodes, we've talked about things like censorship resistance, that being the crypto principle that in the world today, you can be cut off from your finances. A bank can close your account, or one of these online platforms can actually freeze your funds. And the idea of censorship resistance is to say that we want finance that no one can close down because it's your money and nobody can take that away from you. Now, what's really fascinating for me here, Kevin, is that when we've spoken about it in the past, it's generally been with guests who are sitting in Europe, sitting in America, for whom this is an ideological value. It's something they may deeply, deeply believe in, but the chances that this has happened in their day-to-day lives is quite minimal. Whereas the picture we're getting from you from Africa is really quite different, right?
Absolutely. You can know this by how much we trust our government and our banks, which is very limited. And you find that even in asking for loans, right, or borrowing money, it's extremely difficult because you need, well, first of all, you need to have access, right? The bank accounts, you need to have structured documentation that allows you to have access to this. And also you need to trust. You need to trust. And that's where, you see your currency spiking up and, you're wondering what's going on, right? So I think the trust element that we have with our government explains why censorship resistance is very important for us.
Yeah, it feels like there's a bit of a disconnect here between the technology we all use every day and the governance that we live under. So in the sense that we go on these platforms that are truly global, where you can talk to anyone in the world and do jobs for anyone in the world. But when it comes to actually getting the money for that, while we have digital money that theoretically you can send around the world in a click, actually the regulation and the rules on that and the way that governments and companies are able to interfere with that doesn't actually match the way that the world has shrunk. And what I'm getting from you is a sense that maybe crypto is already starting to be an answer to that in Africa. Tell us about that.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting because you already had a huge amount of volumes of peer-to-peer trading, which were students, by the way. These were kids who, receiving money from their uncles or aunts in Canada or the US, and they just wanted to hold the money in some sort of a digital form, usually Bitcoin, potentially also USD, a stable coin. And these were the numbers that everybody was like, hold on a second, what's going on there? Why are people using crypto? Why are people interested in storing this asset whilst, no merchant is accepting this? So clearly there's some sort of interest in that. And I think these were sort of the first indicators of the need before regulators understood what this was, or before there were any infrastructures or hubs or companies using the technology. Lots of students were using this based of a need, whether people liked it or not. And I think that was what led me as well to trying to dig a little bit more and see, okay, what's going on here? What can we do with this? So yeah, I think it's certainly relevant.
Yeah, and it's almost as if the students had that intuition that, hey, we're being educated on a global world. We're looking into a global world. We need a way to make our financial lives match that. It feels to me that that's where some of the impetus is coming from.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. But you really have to talk to these guys. You have to talk to these students and figure out, okay, so what is your end goal, right? Because you're over-the-counter trader and you're sort of collecting these digital currencies and selling them for local currencies. So as you discuss and talk to them, I feel like these kids were way ahead of the time because they were using it really since it was available, and that kind of leaves us to think where this is going to go in the future, right? But that's just kind of give you a taste of how far ahead they were back in. When I started, it was in 2016, 2017. They're already trading.
Are governments in Africa looking at the Trump administration and saying, okay, the world's supposedly most powerful country is now changing its attitude perhaps towards crypto. It's now listening to what the students were saying back in 2016, 2017. Is that making governments in Africa saying, hey, maybe they're onto something? Is that making them push in the other direction? What's the kind of dynamic there?
Yeah, see, that's interesting, Nathan. There's certainly been attempts from governments like Kenya, Nigeria, even South Africa, actually, at some point, to first understand how to protect the consumers, right? And establish the rules of what you can and cannot do, which is important. Now, with the US and the administration looking to push forward the narrative, and it's also going to a specific direction, I do think that governments in Africa are sort of on a standby position and still trying to see where is this going to go? What exactly will be allowed? I think it's too soon to mention, any major movers. But we still see things on a very small scale, but I think so far it's more based on regulation and the rules as opposed to, ex-government is now adopting some sort of tokenization or sort of mainstream adoption of cryptocurrencies or blockchain. It's too soon, I think, to say that.
Interesting. Now, one of the things that we try to do on this show is to be really quite specific, because often conversations about crypto remain quite theoretical and we're left asking, okay, it's all very nice, but is crypto this kind of, hammer in search of a nail? Or are we starting to see what it can actually do? And I feel we get this really interesting perspective from Africa, where there is this urgency to fill financial needs. So let's speak in very real terms about applications of crypto that we're starting to see in Africa. One of them that I wanted to ask you about, you've actually given us a bit of insight, but maybe you can take us a tiny bit deeper, which is cross-border payments. You've identified the difficulties that you can be censored, you can be stopped, it can be practically very difficult. Give us another example of where cross-border payments can really be helped by access to crypto.
Yeah, so for cross-border payment, something that it enables is lending and borrowing. So to give you an example, imagine someone who is using another example, for example, in Kenya, right? They're using M-Pesa. They don't really have access to the traditional bank account. They may not be able to borrow or lend money. Now, blockchain, what it does is that you can actually now do that because you can use platforms that allows you to now track basically these transactions where you can lend a small amount of money to some member in the community that uses this platform and make a little bit of interest without really needing a traditional bank. So that kind of gives you an opening now because you're like, okay, well, actually, I don't really need to go through the hurdles to open up a bank account, which I never really had to. And I can use blockchain technology without the consumer even knowing that they're using blockchain. It's just a platform now that allows you to directly lend and borrow money. Yeah, so this is just one example that we're seeing currently now today.
Right, but very real world problems, you're saying, not just kind of, up in the air. We were talking before we started recording also about energy. You were starting to tell me something really fascinating about energy in Africa. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I can give you a practical and personal example. So I'm now based in South Africa. And most South Africans will tell you, power outage, which is basically your electricity being cut, is something that we're aware and it's a common experience. In fact, there's been even, schedules where they'll tell you, from this hour to this hour, there won't be any power, so you can sort of prepare in advance, which is horrible. Well, you get used to it essentially, but it's one of these big problems. Now, what you can now do with blockchain is that you can actually trade solar energy or other renewable energy directly with each other with using sort of blockchain-based smart contracts, which again allows you to basically have an ability to not be constrained to your local power grid. So imagine, a small village in Zambia, right? They basically built, a mini power plant close by a river. And the thing is that the power plant produces more electricity than the village needs. Now, you would technically have this excess energy go to waste. That's usually what happens.
Because there's no national grid, are you saying?
Well, they don't have access to it because they have a mini grid, which is very prevalent. In
Got it. Got it. So there's actually energy going to waste and people elsewhere sitting in homes really in the middle of a power cut because there's not enough energy in their area.
Correct.
Got it.
Correct. So now what you can do, to give you a very concrete example, you could essentially set up, a Bitcoin mining computers, basically like a center that mines computer that usually would run only when there's extra electricity. And you can earn money then in Bitcoin instead of wasting the power, which then helps you then pay for the power station. It makes it cheaper to also run the electricity, and it's also self-sustaining. And then people can actually use now the extra energy actually that is being wasted.
But that would need to be local. You wouldn't be able to sell it to another area. But what you're saying is in a place that doesn't have the infrastructure of a national grid, this is a really creative way of actually using the excess energy to generate Bitcoin or to mine Bitcoin, which is a process that requires energy. You will never kind of waste a kilowatt of electricity. That's massively creative.
Exactly. And it's essentially, you're right. It's a local solution towards a local problem. Mm-hmm. But that also opens up now ideas of, okay, how can we almost kind of like bring this energy, if you could sort of package that excess energy, and then essentially you can now sell it or, trade it with someone else in another community. That can also happen.
Yeah. So there's the potential for actually establishing blockchain-based systems that would actually take power from one area to another. And the infrastructure would take a cut and there would be an automated way of actually selling that electricity that doesn't require initial investment by a single person. That's a really, really clever use. And it sounds like that's the kind of thing that is very much part of the conversation in Africa. That's really fascinating. And you mentioned one other thing before. Actually, you mentioned lots, and my head is buzzing with the ideas that you mentioned, but we'll take time to focus on one more, which was decentralized internet. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so getting internet in many parts in Africa can be hard and expensive for many people. And by the way, it's a thing. Like you will have airtime, which is essentially like money that you put on your phone, and then your provider gives you data directly. So most people don't necessarily have a monthly subscription to data. It's just like you pay as you go kind of thing. And it's important. A lot of youth use it. Everybody's kind of like on it. Now, the problem is that it's just hard to get and sometimes expensive, most of the time expensive. What now people are doing is that you can essentially build communities where you can set up small internet spots, like kind of like your Wi-Fi hotspots, if you will, and share it essentially with neighbors. And what blockchain again would sort of do is that it kind of like would keep track of who is sharing the internet, and making sure that as you share, you can also get rewarded fairly and quickly and immediately. So you don't really need a middleman to sort of get paid or rewarded, directly. And everybody's kind of like a fair sort of system. You can also see who perhaps, could cheat the system or whatnot. And that kind of brings internet where big companies can't reach in regions and areas that they can't really go to. And so these are essentially like companies that are using blockchain to kind of like distribute a network of hotspots, if you will, in different areas and different regions that are much more cost effective and also incentivized to do that. It takes long times for these large companies to be able to make the decision and execute on the decision to provide internet or broadband internet in some of these communities. And blockchain would have kind of been like the initiator, but also somehow the sustainer until that is being made.
Yeah, I think that's a real mark of success of blockchain. If blockchain is actually, pushing the conversation, actually challenging, companies saying, hey, blockchain can do this. If we need to do it, we'll do it. But throwing down a challenge, hey guys, if you can bring everyone who needs the internet without blockchain stepping in, also do that. It's a win-win situation. And, just talking to you, Kevin, it makes me really energized to step outside of that bubble that we're so often stuck in blockchain, in that US-centric, Europe-centric worldview. Because I find that when I step out of that and speak to you, talk about Africa, you really see how, the need is there. There are really clear needs for all these kinds of opportunities. So thank you so much for joining us on the Clear Crypto podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Kevin, it has been really interesting talking to you. I want you to come back soon and tell us more about the world of crypto that is growing within Africa, such fascinating topics. Now, listeners, if you have enjoyed today's conversation, there are previous episodes that you may not have heard, and the one with Elie Ben-Sasson particularly sticks in my mind, but there are so many great conversations. Just search for Clear Crypto Podcast, and you will find that treasure trove. And in particular, next week's episode is one that you're going to want to grab your friends, grab your family who are not so familiar with crypto and say, hey, this is where you get to really get a feel of what this is all about. So whatever you do, don't miss next week's episode. We would love to hear your feedback, your thoughts, and about topics that you want us to discuss on the podcast. Really looking forward to seeing you, talking to you again here on the Clear Crypto Podcast, which is brought to you, of course, by StarkWare and Cointelegraph. One final thing, if you would like to follow me on Twitter, it's at Nathan on Crypto. That would be absolutely fantastic. See you next time on the Clear Crypto Podcast.